Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm one of the BCBAs here at Chicago Pediatric Therapy and Wellness Center. And I'm also the behavioral sleep practitioner as well. So I work with a lot of families. I've studied sleep, read books about sleep, done the whole thing. So I wanted to take a second to share a presentation and teach you a little bit about sleep. I'll go ahead and share this now. Okay. So perfect. So sleep basics, simple strategies to improve outcomes. As I said previously, I'm Ashley Donathan. I'm a BCBA here. Some things that we're going to be chatting about today. So why is sleep so important? What typical sleep stealers are, what making small changes could look like, sleep training checklist, and then any questions. But for the question part, you can go ahead and just email me if any come up. I appreciate you taking some time today. So for the sleep training portion of it, we're not going to get into the very specific sleep training and what that looks like. A lot of the times, as I'll talk about in a little bit, once we clean up the sleep schedule and the sleep routine or bedtime routine, a lot of the time sleep training might not even be needed. So with that said, we'll go over a little checklist, and if you're still having these barriers with sleep, you can go ahead and reach out to me, and I'm happy to take more of a consultative role with sleep training. Okay, so first off, what is sleep? So we do it for about a third of our lives. We can't care for our young. We can't provide, hunt, gather, or work. And we're very susceptible to prey predators. We don't push, build, or create anything that pushes humanity forward. With that said, this is a very old perspective of sleep. However, in reality, it shows that it is important. This is something that has never changed, right? A lot of the times, like our bodies evolve. However, sleep hasn't. So Matthew Walker actually argues or questions, is it mother's nature's biggest mistake? And then discoveries are still being made all the time regarding sleep and all the benefits that come with high quality sleep. The book that I referenced there, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker, it's actually a great book. It's right here. You can order it on Amazon. Highly recommend. Matthew Walker is just a huge fan of research and a huge fan of sleep. So highly recommend it. So what happens while we sleep? Our bodies gain so much from consistent high quality sleep. The brain detoxes, liver detoxes, immune system regenerates, nutrients breaks down, muscles repair and regenerate, cellular regeneration, dreams regulate our emotions, memories are stored, sorted, and dumped, blood pressure decreases, and blood glucose decreases / regulates. Now I've highlighted or bolded, I guess I should say, dreams regulate our emotions and memories are stored and dumped. Because although many great things come from sleep, looking at children and like emotional regulation, and if you take like that behavioral piece into the mix, sleep is so important. And a lot of times too, when children come to see us, say full-time or for a couple sessions, whatever that looks like, you can tell, oh, we had a difficult night of sleep, and they come in and it's a little bit harder of a day versus like they come in and they're like ready to go. However, from the prevalent side of things, sleep problems are a very common issue. And it's, I think, more common than a lot of people think. So really trying to stress the importance of sleep. And, it's one of those things that like when you're ready to like take that journey to better sleep, I'm here to answer any questions, but I am obviously a huge fan of it. So highly recommend looking into sleep and sort of starting that as just a foundation from like learning and behavioral regulation and everything else that life throws at you. So how sleep works, a lot of people think that you fall asleep at night and then you simply wake up in the morning. However, this is not the case. We fall asleep, wake up, and put ourselves back all night long. All night long. So we fall asleep, we are in a lighter phase of sleep, and then we shift into a deeper phase of sleep. With that said, throughout the night, we shift into lighter phases. We get to the point of almost being conscious, and then we fall back into that deep sleep. So if anyone has the Aura rings or the Apple Watches and you look at your watch and you're like, oh my gosh, like I was up so much or I didn't hit that deep sleep, it's actually not supposed to go like that. It happens at not variable, but consistent times throughout the night. So approximately about 1 to 2 a.m., depending on like when you fall asleep, this is when these moments become a little closer together. With that said, if a child hasn't been taught how to independently sleep, they'll typically wake up in these moments. And what will happen here is if the environment has shifted a little bit too, so we'll talk about that, the child is likely to wake back up and, they might need mom and dad to fall back asleep. They might need to go get their blanket or their bottle of milk or whatever it may be. So when looking at the sleep environment, I always ask a bunch of tedious little questions about, well, has the light stayed on or off throughout the entire night? Is there, a fan on? Does that turn off? Does the temperatures in the room change? Because all these little variables will lead to getting woken up at these lighter phases of sleep. An interesting story, I had worked with a family a couple years ago that had to do their laundry at night, and it just so happens to back up against the child's wall. Now, with that said, what would happen is they would start their laundry at night, and the child would fall asleep getting used to the washer and dryer, and then it would turn off in the middle of the night, and then the child would wake back up as they shifted into these lighter phases. And then they had a hard time putting themselves back down because they needed that sound to be able to go back to sleep. So when looking at sleep, there's a lot of different little variables. So just something to keep in mind that the environment should stay the exact same throughout the entire night. And that will help with some of those middle of the night awakenings. As it says here, we're not going to manage these awakenings. We're going to teach independent sleep. So if they do wake up, they can put themselves back down. Sleep is one of the only moments that we expect children to lay still in the dark alone. So it's one of those things that needs to be taught sometimes, and that's totally fine. So how prevalent are sleep problems? Approximately 35 to 50% of neurotypical children have some sort of sleep problem. For children with ASD, it's slightly higher at 40 to 80%. We predict that this number is actually higher as, a child might have difficulty sleeping and be waking up, and, some kids will go turn on the TV and find a snack themselves. But if they're not waking up mom and dad, then these numbers aren't typically reported, right? So when you're navigating sleep problems or, kids waking up in the middle of the night, a lot of the times it's the whole family that's having a hard time with sleep. So sleep needs by age, some considerations. So the final nap typically drops 3 to 3.5 years. If you drop the nap, earlier bedtime, keep the nap, later bedtime. With that said, this 3 to 3.5 age can shift around. It could potentially be 2.5. It could potentially be 4. You're really just gauging like the overall sleep pattern. Now, with that said, around this time when nap is dropped, it is very, very common for kids to have nightmares and night terrors. A lot of times that is due to the dropping of the nap and the shifting of the cycles. Bedtimes may become earlier or later, depending on naps or daytime sleep. So as stated above, if, the child is napping at, 12 to 1, they have a sleep awake window of 6 hours, then realistically going to bed at 7. Now, if they don't have that, it might, become earlier or later. Over here, and I'll attach some of these flyers and make sure that you guys have access to these, but it lays out the wake windows. So this green over here is the wake window. The blue is the time of sleep. Something that I think people struggle with a little bit is the green is the time that we need to be awake for our body to biologically produce sleep. So it's not necessarily like, oh, they don't want to, or, oh, they just they can't. It's more so like they need to be awake for a certain amount of time for their body to be like, okay, I'm ready to to be put back down. And as you see, the wake window expands as they get older. 12 plus years, that's always sort of an interesting age as, middle school, high school, school starts so early, right? But then their wake window is expanding, so typically leads into those later bedtimes. So, there's lots of books and research surrounding sleep pertaining to teenagers, really, because questioning whether or not they get adequate sleep. Um, once, perfect, yes, we already touched on that. Okay, so setting events, sleep stealers, these are fascinating to me. And I love sleep. I love learning about sleep because I talk about this aiming towards children and children's sleep. However, this applies to everybody's sleep. So that was something that was really big for me. As I learned about these, I actually made a few tweaks to my own routine because you learn these new facts. And, I like to say that I sleep very well, but it's hard to put the phone down. So with that said, too much daytime sleep. So like stealing sleep is a big one. So say in the car or in a stroller, will essentially steal sleep from nighttime. Screen time, blue light, viewing within an hour of expected sleep, up and down vestibular motion, crashing, running, elevated heart rates and core temperatures, absence of bedtime routine sleep signals, late morning wake-ups, inconsistent morning wake-ups, and or mistimed bedtimes. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of those. So screen time blue light. This is actually something that recently they've debunked a little bit. Not to say that blue light doesn't impact sleep. However, there's actually been recent research that suggests that it doesn't impact it as much as we previously thought. However, still keeping it an hour away from bedtime is important. There is still the blue light. And back in the day, I'm talking way back in the caveman days, there's only two sources in which we would get blue light from, and that was fire and the sun. And now we are constantly surrounded by it. So what happens is it stops the melatonin production and can actually delay sleep onset for up to 3 hours. So with that said, while watching TV at night, if you turn on a movie, it's actually best to have all the lights on in the room with the TV versus all the lights off with the TV, because those light rays actually disrupt the blue light. So that was one tweak that I had personally made of, if I'm going to sit here and scroll on my phone and whatnot, let's have all the lights on. With that said, too, continued content leads to continued engagement, not sleep. So with the reels and the TikTok and social media, it's so easy to continue and get something fresh all the time. So as you're scrolling, there's always something new. So you're going to have that continued engagement and not sleep, and you sometimes just get into that zone where you keep on scrolling, and it never really becomes boring. So that is now suggesting that it impacts sleep a little bit more than the actual blue light. So up and down vestibular motion, this is actually a big one because a lot of the times people think that getting the wiggles out before bed is a good thing. However, it's very alerting to the sensory system. It encourages focus and attention, and then it actually raises the core temperature at a time when core temperature should be decreasing. So in order to prepare for sleep, our body's temperature needs to decrease by 2 to 3 degrees in order to sleep. So with that said, that is why the up and down vestibular motion isn't always the best. You can replace this with, puzzles or coloring or building blocks or whatever it may be. And if that's something that you need to work on to replace, you can, talk to your BCBA about that independent play, what that could look like, or just work on, that engagement at home and pulling out fun puzzles and whatnot. With that said, another common misconception is that bath time is not a good thing to do before bed. However, it's a great thing to do before bed because the process our body goes through in order to cool itself down actually soothes you to sleep, versus heats your body temperature up. So that is a great tool to use. Inconsistent schedules. So variable morning wake-ups leads to variable bedtimes and naps. The brain can't predict when to expect sleep, and it's a silent sleep stealer. So a lot of the families I consult with, we start with the morning wake up, starting with a consistent morning wake up. So whatever that might be that's realistic for that family, whether it be 7 a.m., 6 a.m., 8 a.m., just working to keep it consistent. Because that's actually when the sleep cycle starts, the morning wake up. Jumping back into talking about those wake windows and how long your body needs to be awake before it can produce sleep. That's essentially where it starts. So why it matters, it often causes night terrors if you have those inconsistent morning wake ups, because we'll talk in a little bit about the sleep cycles, and you're cutting off a little bit of that REM, which leads to the emotional regulation. So sometimes you'll see like kids wake up in a panic. Can lead to falling asleep, crashing in non-sleep areas, which might lead to sleep dependencies that aren't sustainable. Late morning wake-ups will lead to late bedtimes, and caregivers may offer bedtime too early. So you want, when thinking about a sleep routine, you want the lights off, being in bed, to signal to the body it is time to sleep. With that said, if you're offering bedtime too early and they're not tired enough, or you're not tired enough to sleep, you're going to lay in bed, and at that point, it's going to desensitize your body to being like, oh, it's time to sleep, when you've just been laying there. Sleep dependency. So the conditions under which we fall asleep maintain sleep through the night. So going back to that diagram of the sleep cycles, when we shift into the lighter phases, or on the bridge of being like conscious, you want the environment to stay the exact same. And if it's not, they might wake up. However, if when they wake up, they need certain things to fall back asleep, they're going to seek those out. So like sustainable could be thumb sucking and pacifier, because they can do that themselves. Special blanket, stuffed animal or doll, lighting remains the same all night, sound that remains the same all night, anything that easily maintained by the child all night long. Now, unsustainable, caregiver lays with the child, then leaves. Child is preferred a new space after child is asleep, or prefers transferred. So child is transferred to a new space after child is asleep. Falls asleep with a bottle of milk, falls asleep with lights, music on, then it's turned off. Anything in the environment that changes after sleep onset. So I know I pulled up the washer dryer example. Another one could be even opening and closing the door. So if your kiddo falls asleep with the door open and it's time for you to go to bed and you walk by and close it, that is enough to wake a child up, especially working with populations that might be a little bit more sensitive to these variables. So melatonin, I get asked quite a bit about melatonin. So it's a hormone. It's not necessarily a sleeping pill or a sedative. And what it does is it signals the body to begin the sleep process. It doesn't maintain sleep. So what happens is, a good analogy for this is, picture you're at like a track and field race. You know, all the runners are lined up. The runners could be your body systems, digestion, your immune system, the whole shebang. Now, melatonin is the gun that fires, that says, okay, everybody's time to sleep. With that said, research shows that each pill can be between 83% less to 498% more than what is on the label. So with that said, if you do decide to go the melatonin route, see if you can just get it prescribed. It'll be a little bit more consistent. It's intended for jet lag and not necessarily short-term use. Great for circadian rhythm correction. So, you know, if you're traveling, and then there's also limited research. But if it is something that you would like to explore and want more information and trying to figure out if it's right for you and your family, it's definitely one of those things that you should go talk to your pediatrician about. So making changes, simple steps, substantial outcomes. So figuring out bedtime. So the previous diagram that I was showing you, again, I'll make sure that you guys have access to all of those, is a good starting point, right? So looking at their age, figuring out how long they need to be awake, and then working backwards. So beginning with a consistent morning wake-up time, calculate what time fall asleep, time lights out time should be for the individual learner. Begin the bedtime routine an hour approximately before sleep. And it can take about 7 to 10 days to see a shift in bedtime rhythm. And doing it at 20 minutes at a time. So all in all, as I was saying, this is pretty much where I start first with my families, is figuring out consistent morning wake up. And then working backwards of like, okay, they need to be awake for 12 hours, or waking up at 7. So let's shoot for 7 p.m., starting the bedtime routine around 6. This is a big one too, 7 to 10 days. So working at sleep, it's not quick, and sometimes it's not always easy. However, it will take about 7 to 10 days to see a shift in the bedtime rhythm. Um, so just being patient if you make these changes, and then making sure that we're doing it like 15, 20 minutes at a time. This shouldn't be, more than that, in the sense that it's going to, shock the system. So bedtime routine. I get asked about this one a lot as well. Excuse me for 1 second. Bedtime routine. So should start, as previously said, about an hour before lights out. Calming passive activities, including a warm bath if appropriate. So the coloring, the puzzles, the drawing, the pretend play, all of that. Implement in about the same order every night. So this is a big piece, because what it's doing is it's, readying the body to go to sleep. It's signaling, hey, in an hour you need to be asleep. So it's important that there's those clear cues as to when you do need to sleep. So avoiding the screen time and high energy activities, as previously mentioned. And then start time will change across childhood and adolescence. So this is another big thing that, you know, families will have kids that, the bedtime routine starts at 7, but then as they start to age, it'll still start at 7. And then that's when you start to see that pushback to bedtime. The other thing too that I've worked through a few times is, if your child is like anti bedtime routine, right? In their head, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to take a bath. That means that we're gearing up for sleep. You can always start the bedtime routine with something fun. Okay. And some may argue that something fun might be the iPad. It might be a movie. It might be a TV show. It's just the timing that you have to look out for a little bit. So if you're like, my kiddo just absolutely loves this video on Coco Melon, or whatever it may be, maybe we start the bedtime routine with that. And we just make sure that it's an hour out of bedtime, right? So, maybe we're sitting down, starting the bedtime routine at 5:45, because we're going to do some videos that's going to help regulate our body. And then we're going to move into like taking a bath, putting on PJs, brushing teeth, whatever that may look like. So it is okay to use it if that's going to help pair your child have like with something positive when it comes to sleep. The other thing that you can do is taking a bath. It's a great time to like put the electronics away. That's a great opportunity to be like, oh, we're in the bath. Let's go ahead and put these up. It's a very natural approach to that. So daytime adjustments to consider. So nap, no nap. So again, looking at the age of the kiddo, and if you're reaching that 3 to 3.5, and you're starting to get some pushback at bedtime, that could be something to consider, dropping the nap. Consistent morning wake up time, sensitization to sleep space. So if a kiddo, has a neutral or negative relationship with their bedroom, like maybe they're not a big fan of sleeping and that's the only time they go in there, it's going to make sleep a little bit harder. So bringing in fun toys, having them hang out in their bed, maybe not in their bed, but just like on their bed with some fun items, playing music, just building that relationship with their bedroom in a positive, regulating way. This is another one too, that if your kiddo is just like following you around the house at all moments of the day, separating during nighttime is difficult. So working towards like a little bit of that like separation too, and accepting separation, doing that in small doses of maybe we're leaving the room for 5 seconds, coming back, leaving the room for 10 seconds, coming back, and adding a little bit more variability to that. Teaching calming play activities or simple one-step task completion to replace running, jumping, and screen time. So that's where, we resort back to, the puzzles and the coloring, put in tasks, whatever it may be. Okay, so independent sleep. So independent sleep can be taught through shaping, fading, and sensitization. We'll likely need to, needed to eliminate the middle of the night awakenings, and is the last step and may be avoided not needed once other variables have been controlled. So this is talking a little bit about sleep training in the sense of a lot of the times if you clean up the bedtime routine, adjust the sleep schedule, make sure that the environment's the same throughout the night, you might not even need to go into sleep training or a more formal plan like that. Sleep, independent sleep. So by fading, I mean, maybe instead of mom sitting on the bed, we're like standing by the bed, or maybe instead of dad laying on the bed, we have a pillow on the floor. So just working our way back from that. Same thing with like the shaping, essentially. And then sleep cycles. So for children that are forced out of bed, we're disrupting REM cycle, which directly relates to attention, memory, consolidation, and learning. So this is a little bit more of a complicated diagram of our sleep cycles. But you'll see right here in cycle 1, we've got a little bit of REM, right? But deeper sleep. As we shift into cycle 5, we have more REM. And this is typically when you start to just like wake up for the day. So what happens if we're not on that consistent sleep schedule and our body's not able to predict when it's going to fall asleep, aka it's not going to be able to predict when to wake up, you're cutting off a little bit of that REM. So, talking about like skill acquisition and behavioral regulation, all of that can be impacted by, early morning inconsistent wake ups and pulling them from REM a little too early. So teaching independent sleep, we're trying to think sustainable and consistent. So independent sleep without extinction. When I say extinction, it just means we're no longer reinforcing that behavior. So sometimes that looks like bedtime passes in the sense of, you get 3 passes to come out of your room. After that third, we're going to ignore you or we're going to walk you back to bed. It should never be like that. I mean, there might be a few circumstances where that's needed. However, when it comes to sleep and sleep treatment, we're trying to keep it as small and incremental as possible to be able to allow for regulation around sleep. If a child is super, super upset, you're not going to be able to put them down anyways. We're just going to get super worked up. So that's what this without extinction is talking about. So it can be shape. So, instead of rubbing their back, maybe your hand's just on their back, and then we work back from there. Parent support can be faded. New expectations can be taught during the day. So going back to independent play and single step instructions and all of that. The separation acceptance too of, hey, mom just left the room. That's fine. Prerequisite skills can be taught during the day. So what I was just talking about. And then the reinforcing value of sleep can be manipulated. So referencing again sleep training, if we're going to actually jump into sleep training and we reach that sort of phase 2 or B, I call it, making sure that we're starting this maybe an hour later. So sleep pressure is a little heavier than at their typical bedtime. So some other strategies to support better sleep. So one change at a time. As I was previously talking about, everything should be like incremental and small shifts. Visual or 3D schedule for some of our learners that like to be able to visualize the plan and predict the future a little bit. Choices for forced choices. So, being like, hey, do you want to do puzzles or do you want to do coloring? As a way of like, you still have the choice, you still have this control, but I'm going to like overall choose what's available. Timers. Social stories for changes. So some kids love a good social story. So talking about what it might look like. Calming strategies, calming routines. So this is a great opportunity to consult your OTs. The transition hierarchy. By this, I mean, hey, maybe instead of jumping from iPad to changing into pajamas, which might be non-preferred, maybe we do iPad to a preferred book to fun bath time with bubbles. So looking at maybe not going from the least preferred or the most preferred to the least preferred immediately, but like working it down in steps almost. And then screen dependencies. So use bath time as an opportunity for screens to disappear. We get a much clearer picture of what the child's body needs when we clean up the sleep routine and the sleep schedule. So some great activities to do before bed, rocking, swinging, gliding, massages, deep pressure on joints, pillow smushes, burrito rolls. So you're rolling them up, applying that pressure. Pulling, some heavy work, matching puzzles, sorting, stacking, all that sort of fun stuff. Running, jumping, crashing, bouncing, wrestling, getting the wiggles out, that's only going to spike those energy levels. So those things should try and be avoided before sleep. Sleep training readiness. So if we're answering no to any of these questions, we're not ready to do sleep training. So does your child wake up about the same time every morning? When bedtime is offered, does your child fall asleep within 5 minutes or so? So looking at that sleep latency, they're in bed, lights off. How long are they laying in bed before they sleep? Does your child fall asleep every night in their designated sleep space where they are expected to remain all night? Can your child tolerate you leaving the room for up to 2 minutes without exhibiting undesired behaviors at bedtime? Does your child have a consistent calming bedtime routine that occurs in about the same time every night? Sleep training, so there's a couple different methods that we use: quiet-based visitation, scheduled visits, and then quality fading. So quiet-based visitations are you're working up on like a schedule. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to, pat or give you a kiss or, um, a light hug, and then I'm going to leave the room. The idea here is that the child falls asleep while they're out of the room. So being very quiet about this. You can extend the time. These are all things that, again, I'm happy to sit down and like come up with a more solid plan for this. If you get to this point and you're like, Ashley, we need some sleep training, I'm happy to help. And then quality fading. That might be for a kiddo that has a very particular sleep dependency. So, maybe they're sleeping and they have to be touching a certain part of mom. So quality fading is just fading back what they have access to in that moment. So maybe instead of like rubbing mom's cheek, we're just like touching mom's cheek, and then we're touching her back, and then we're quality fading from there. So both of these methods are very systematic. So that's why I'm like, please reach out. And then that is about it. Thank you so much for listening. I went ahead and included my email if any other questions come up, and I'll make sure that you also have all the flyers that we had talked about today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.